The late autumn wind swept through the narrow streets of Manchester, rustling fallen leaves across the cobblestones, as Oliver Matthews hurried through his usual morning routine at the Golden Spoon restaurant. At 23, he had already spent 5 years working as a waiter in this bustling establishment, tucked away in the heart of the city's historic district. The restaurant's brass fixtures gleamed in the early morning light as Oliver polished the last of the wine glasses, his mind wandering to the stories he would write once his shift ended. Though his current occupation paid the bills, his true passion lay in crafting tales of adventure and wonder, stories that transported readers far beyond the confines of their everyday lives. "Table 6 needs their morning tea, Oliver," called Margaret, the head waitress, her grey hair neatly pinned beneath her cap. "And Mr. Richardson wants his usual breakfast set up ready before he arrives." "Right away," Oliver responded, adjusting his black apron and gathering the necessary items onto his serving tray. He moved with practiced ease through the restaurant's morning crowd, dodging briefcases and winter coats as customers settled in for their breakfast meetings. The familiar rhythm of clinking cutlery and murmured conversations filled the air, but something felt different that morning. Perhaps it was the way the sunlight caught the frost on the windows, or maybe it was the unusual quiet that had settled over the typically bustling street outside. Whatever it was, Oliver couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. His intuition proved correct when he noticed a small figure huddled against the restaurant's front window. Through the frosted glass, he could make out the shape of a young girl, no more than 12 years old. Her thin jacket pulled tight around her shoulders as she watched the diners inside. Oliver's heart tightened at the sight. He had seen many street children before. Manchester had its fair share of struggling families, but something about this particular girl caught his attention. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, proud despite her circumstances, or the intense focus in her eyes as she observed the people inside. During his break, Oliver slipped out through the side door, careful not to attract attention from Mr. Thompson, the restaurant owner, who had strict policies about maintaining the establishment's reputation. He approached the girl carefully, noting how she tensed at his presence, but didn't run away. "Would you like something to eat?" he asked gently, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her. The girl studied him with keen brown eyes, intelligence and wariness battling across her features. Her dark hair was tied back in a neat, if somewhat messy, ponytail, a small attempt at dignity that spoke volumes about her character. "I'm not asking for anything," she replied, her voice carrying a slight northern accent. "I'm just looking." "I know you're not asking," Oliver smiled, "but I'm offering. I'm Oliver, by the way. I work here." She hesitated, then straightened up slightly. "I'm Sarah," she said after a moment, "but I can't pay you." "Well, Sarah," Oliver said, an idea forming in his mind, "perhaps we could make an arrangement. I've noticed you watching the people inside. Do you enjoy observing them?" Sarah nodded cautiously, her eyes darting between Oliver and the window. "What if I told you I could bring you something to eat, and in exchange you could draw pictures of the customers? I've got some paper and pencils in my bag that I use for writing. Would you be interested in that?" The change in Sarah's expression was immediate and remarkable. Her eyes lit up, and for a moment, the hardship evident in her young face melted away. I do like to draw," she admitted. "Sometimes I find bits of paper and make sketches, but then it's settled," Oliver declared, already planning how to sneak food out without Mr. Thompson noticing. "Wait here, and I'll bring you something warm to eat. Then we can talk more about the drawing arrangement." As Oliver hurried back inside, his mind raced with possibilities. He knew he was taking a risk. Mr. Thompson was notoriously strict about giving away food, but something told him this was the right thing to do. He had no way of knowing that this simple act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone involved. Back in the kitchen, Oliver carefully prepared a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and sausages, adding an extra serving of each when he was sure no one was looking. As he arranged the food, he could see Sarah through the kitchen window, still standing in the same spot, but now with a hint of hope in her posture that hadn't been there before. This was more than just feeding a hungry child, Oliver realized. This was about giving someone a chance to share their gift with the world. And somehow he knew that Sarah's gift was something special, something that could touch people's hearts in ways that went far beyond simple drawings on paper. When Oliver returned with the plate of food, Sarah's eyes widened at the generous portions, but she maintained her composure. He also brought his notebook and several well-sharpened pencils, setting everything up on a small table near the window where she could observe the restaurant's patrons while eating. "Take your time," Oliver said softly, watching as she tried to eat slowly despite her obvious hunger. "I've got another hour before my break ends, and I've cleared it with Margaret. She's the kind one with the grey hair to let you sit here." As Sarah ate, her attention kept drifting to the diners inside. Her fingers twitched toward the pencils, and Oliver noticed her studying the faces of the customers with an artist's eye. There was something remarkable about the way she observed people, not just their external features, but something deeper, as if she could see past their public facades to the emotions beneath. "Would you like to try drawing someone?" Oliver suggested, pushing the notebook toward her. Sarah hesitated only briefly before picking up a pencil, her small hand steady as she began to sketch. Oliver watched in amazement as the image took shape on the paper. Sarah had chosen to draw an elderly couple sitting by the window, and with each stroke of her pencil, she captured not just their appearance, but the essence of their relationship. The way the old gentleman leaned slightly toward his wife as she spoke, the gentle smile playing at the corners of her mouth, the comfortable familiarity between them, it was all there on the page, rendered with remarkable skill and sensitivity. "Sarah, this is extraordinary," Oliver breathed, studying the drawing. "How long have you been drawing?" She shrugged, adding final touches to the sketch. "Always, I suppose. I find bits of paper, sometimes old newspapers. When I can't find paper, I draw in the dirt or frost on windows. It helps me understand people better." A plan began to form in Oliver's mind. "Would you like to draw more people? I could arrange it so you could sit here regularly. The customers might even want to buy your drawings." Sarah's pencil stopped moving. "Really? You think people would want them?" "I'm certain of it. Look at this. You've captured something special here. It's not just what these people look like, it's who they are." Throughout the afternoon, Oliver brought Sarah more paper, and she created several more portraits. Each one seemed to capture something unique about its subject: a businessman's hidden weariness, a young mother's pride as she watched her children, a student's nervous energy before an interview. The customers began to notice. First, it was just curious glances at the young girl drawing so intently by the window. Then, as word spread about the remarkable portraits, people started requesting to see their own drawings. Sarah's quiet concentration never wavered, even as small crowds gathered to watch her work. Margaret, who had been watching the situation unfold, approached Oliver as he cleared a nearby table. "She's got a gift, that one," she said quietly. "But Mr. Thompson won't like it. You know how he feels about anything that might disturb the regular customers." Oliver nodded, knowing she was right. Mr. Thompson, the restaurant's owner, was proud of the Golden Spoon's reputation as one of Manchester's most respectable establishments. He worked hard to maintain an atmosphere of refined dining, and Oliver knew he would see Sarah's presence as a threat to that carefully cultivated image. But as Oliver watched Sarah work, seeing the joy her drawings brought to people's faces, he knew he had to find a way to protect this opportunity. The talent she possessed was too precious to be dismissed because of prejudice or pride. A young couple approached Sarah's table, admiring the portrait she had drawn of them. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the drawing. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You've captured exactly how I felt when he proposed just now. How did you know?" Sarah smiled shyly. "I just draw what I see," she replied. But Oliver noticed how she sat a little straighter, how her confidence seemed to grow with each positive response. As the afternoon wore on, more customers requested portraits, offering to pay for Sarah's work. Oliver helped manage the small crowd that gathered, ensuring Sarah had everything she needed while still attending to his regular duties. He could see that this arrangement could work, could even become something special for the restaurant if handled properly. But as the dinner rush approached, Oliver spotted Mr. Thompson's car pulling up outside. The moment of truth was coming, and Oliver knew he would have to handle it carefully. He had to find a way to show his employer that Sarah's presence could benefit the restaurant, that her talent was something to be celebrated rather than hidden away. Looking at Sarah's growing collection of drawings, each one a window into the hearts of the Golden Spoon's patrons, Oliver steeled himself for the confrontation to come. Some things were worth fighting for, and he believed Sarah's gift was one of them. Mr. Thompson's polished Oxford shoes clicked against the restaurant's wooden floor as he made his way inside, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dining room. The usual buzz of conversation dimmed slightly at his arrival, and Oliver noticed how Sarah's pencil stilled against her paper. "Matthews," Mr. Thompson called out, his voice carrying that particular tone of controlled displeasure that Oliver had come to recognize. "A word, if you please." Oliver squeezed Sarah's shoulder reassuringly before making his way to his employer's office, a small room tucked away behind the kitchen. The space always reminded him of a bank manager's office, with its heavy wooden desk and leather-bound ledgers lining the walls. "Would you care to explain?" Mr. Thompson began, settling into his chair. "Why there's a street urchin drawing pictures in my establishment?" "Sir, she's not just drawing pictures," Oliver replied, standing straight and meeting his employer's gaze. "Sarah has an extraordinary talent. The customers are quite taken with her portraits. Several have already offered to pay for them. That's not the point, Matthews." Mr. Thompson's fingers drummed against his desk. "The Golden Spoon has a certain standard to maintain. We serve Manchester's finest citizens. What do you suppose they think when they see—" He gestured vaguely toward the dining room. "They think they're seeing something remarkable," Oliver countered, his voice firm but respectful. "I've watched their reactions all afternoon. Sarah's drawings don't just capture faces. They capture moments, emotions, connections between people. She's creating memories for our customers." Mr. Thompson's expression remained unmoved. "Noble sentiments, Matthews. But this is a business, not a charity. I cannot have her sitting here day after day, taking up space that paying customers could occupy." "She could be an asset to the restaurant," Oliver pressed. "Think about it, sir. No other establishment in Manchester offers anything like this. It could become our unique feature, something that sets us apart." "Enough." Mr. Thompson stood, straightening his waistcoat. "I want her gone by the time I return from my meeting. And Matthews." He paused at the door. "Don't ever make decisions about my business without consulting me again." Oliver stood alone in the office, his hands clenched at his sides. Through the window he could see Sarah still drawing, her small frame hunched over the paper as she worked. A group of customers stood nearby, admiring her latest creation. As he watched, an elderly gentleman approached Sarah's table. Oliver recognized him as Professor Williams, a regular customer known for his generous tips and kind manner. The professor studied the drawing Sarah was working on, his expression thoughtful. "Young lady," Oliver heard him say as he stepped out of the office, "you have quite a gift. Would you consider drawing my portrait? I'd like to give it to my granddaughter for her birthday." Sarah's face lit up, but before she could respond, Mr. Thompson's voice cut through the air. "I apologize, Professor Williams, but the young lady was just leaving. We don't permit solicitation on the premises." The professor's bushy eyebrows drew together. "Solicitation? My good man, this child has talent that would put many professional artists to shame. Surely you can see the value in nurturing such a gift." "The Golden Spoon is a restaurant, Professor, not an art gallery." Mr. Thompson's tone was final. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend." Oliver watched the scene unfold, his mind racing. He looked at Sarah, who had begun gathering her drawings with trembling hands, her earlier confidence crumbling under Mr. Thompson's cold dismissal. He thought about all the stories he'd written in his spare time, tales of people standing up for what they believed in, doing what was right despite the consequences. It was time to stop just writing about such moments and start living them. "Sir," Oliver called out, causing Mr. Thompson to pause at the door. "If Sarah leaves, I leave too." The restaurant fell silent. Even the cooks peered out from the kitchen, wooden spoons suspended in mid-stir. "Mr. Thompson turned slowly, his expression thunderous. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me, sir." Oliver's voice was steady, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Sarah has brought more joy to this place in one afternoon than I've seen in months. If you can't see the value in that, then perhaps this isn't the right place for either of us." "Oliver, don't," Sarah whispered, clutching her drawings to her chest. "You can't lose your job because of me." But Oliver had made up his mind. 5 years he'd spent in this restaurant, watching people come and go, serving their meals and listening to their stories. He'd always felt like an observer in their lives, never quite part of the narrative. Now, finally, he had the chance to write his own story. The brisk Manchester air hit Oliver's face as he stepped out of the Golden Spoon for the last time, his belongings stuffed into his old backpack. Sarah walked beside him, clutching her drawings and casting worried glances in his direction. "You shouldn't have done that," she said softly. "It was a good job. You had regular pay, tips, and a boss who couldn't see the value in kindness," Oliver finished, adjusting the strap of his bag. "Besides, I've got some savings. We'll figure something out." As they walked down the street, a familiar voice called out behind them. "Oliver! Wait!" They turned to see Lucy Chen hurrying toward them, her nurse's uniform visible under her winter coat. Lucy was a regular at the Golden Spoon, often stopping by for tea during her breaks from the Royal Manchester Infirmary. "I saw what happened," she said, catching up to them. "That was quite something, standing up to Mr. Thompson like that." Oliver shrugged, trying to hide his growing anxiety about his impulsive decision. It felt right at the moment. "Though I suppose I should start looking for a new job straight away." Lucy's dark eyes sparkled. "Actually, that's why I ran after you. My brother David owns the Copper Kettle over on Portland Street. They've been short-staffed since their senior waiter left last month. Want me to put in a word?" Hope fluttered in Oliver's chest. The Copper Kettle was a smaller establishment than the Golden Spoon, but it had a reputation for its warm atmosphere and loyal customer base. "That would be brilliant, Lucy. Thank you." "Come on then," Lucy said, gesturing for them to follow. "David's usually in the kitchen at this hour. We can talk to him now." She glanced at Sarah. "Both of you." The Copper Kettle sat on a corner, its windows steamy from the warmth inside. Copper pots hung from the ceiling, catching the light and creating a cozy glow throughout the space. The smell of fresh-baked bread and brewing coffee filled the air. David Chen proved to be everything his sister had described: practical, good-humored, and quick to recognize an opportunity when he saw one. After hearing their story and examining Sarah's drawings, he not only offered Oliver a job, but suggested an arrangement that could benefit everyone. "The flat above the restaurant has been empty since Mrs. Higgins moved to her daughter's place," David explained, leading them up a narrow staircase. "It's small, mind you, but it's clean and warm. You could stay here, both of you, and we'll work out a fair rent from your wages." The flat was indeed small, but to Oliver and Sarah it looked like a palace. A tiny kitchen opened onto a living room with a large window overlooking the street. A short hallway led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom that had seen better days, but was perfectly functional. "As for the young artist," David continued, smiling at Sarah, "I think we could arrange a proper setup for you in the restaurant. Nothing forced. You draw when you want to, and we'll display your work on the walls. If customers want to commission portraits, we'll handle it properly, with fair payment for your time." Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean, like a real artist?" "Exactly like a real artist," David nodded, "though you'll need to keep up with your studies too. Lucy knows some teachers who could help with that." As David and Lucy discussed the details of the arrangement, Oliver watched Sarah wander around the flat, running her fingers along the walls as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. She paused at the window, gazing out at the street below, and Oliver saw her reach for her pencil, already inspired by the new view before her. "Oliver?" she called softly, not turning from the window. Do you think this could really work?" He joined her at the window, seeing the hope and fear mingled in her reflection. "I think," he said carefully, "that sometimes the best stories start when we're brave enough to turn the page." Below them, the late afternoon sun caught the copper sign of their new home, making it glow like a beacon in the gathering dusk. The street was busy with people heading home from work, each carrying their own stories, their own dreams. And now, in this small corner of Manchester, 2 more stories had found a place to take root and grow. The first month at the Copper Kettle passed in a whirlwind of activity. Oliver quickly settled into his new routine, finding that David's relaxed management style suited him far better than Mr. Thompson's rigid rules. The regular customers welcomed him warmly, and soon he knew their usual orders by heart. Sarah, meanwhile, had transformed a small corner of the restaurant into her own artistic space. David had provided her with a proper drawing table, positioned near a window where the natural light was best. Her artwork adorned the walls, creating an ever-changing gallery that customers loved to browse while waiting for their meals. Lucy had kept her promise about education, introducing them to Mrs. Blackwood, a retired teacher who lived nearby. 3 times a week, Sarah spent her mornings studying with her, catching up on years of missed schooling with remarkable determination. "She's quite brilliant, you know," Mrs. Blackwood told Oliver one afternoon, watching Sarah work on her mathematics exercises. She has a natural ability to see patterns and relationships. It's the same gift that makes her art so special. The restaurant's atmosphere had changed too. Sarah's presence had brought something unique to the copper kettle. Customers now lingered over their meals, hoping to be captured in one of her drawings. Business had increased steadily, with people coming from other parts of Manchester just to see the young artist at work. One particularly busy Saturday afternoon, Oliver noticed David watching Sarah as she worked on a family portrait. The restaurant owner's expression was difficult to read, but there was something calculating in his gaze that made Oliver slightly uneasy. "She's quite the attraction, isn't she?" David remarked later, as Oliver helped clean up after closing. "I had 3 different parties ask about commissioning portraits today." "That's wonderful," Oliver replied cautiously, "though we need to be careful not to overwhelm her. She's still catching up with her studies." David nodded absently, his attention focused on the day's receipts. Of course. But think of the possibilities, Oliver. We could organize proper portrait sessions, maybe even art shows. The Copper Kettle could become known as Manchester's artistic hub." The enthusiasm in David's voice was genuine, but it reminded Oliver uncomfortably of how Mr. Thompson used to discuss his plans for the Golden Spoon. There was that same focus on reputation, on standing out among the competition. Upstairs in their flat that evening, Oliver found Sarah sitting by the window, sketching the sunset. She looked happier and healthier than when he'd first met her, her cheeks fuller and her eyes brighter. The regular meals and safe shelter had worked wonders, but it was more than that. She had found her place, her purpose. "Mrs. Blackwood says I might be ready for proper school soon," she announced, not looking up from her drawing. "She's going to help me prepare for the entrance exams." "That's brilliant news," Oliver said, settling into the worn armchair they'd found at a charity shop. "How do you feel about that?" Sarah's pencil paused. "A bit scared," she admitted, "but excited too. I never thought I'd get to go to school again." She glanced at him. "Will I still be able to draw here at the restaurant?" "Of course you will," Oliver assured her, though a small worry nagged at him. "We'll just need to make sure we balance everything properly." A knock at their door interrupted their conversation. It was David carrying a stack of papers. "Sorry to disturb you both so late," he said, though it was clear from his excited expression that he wasn't really sorry at all. "But I've had some ideas I wanted to discuss. I've been thinking about how we can make the most of Sarah's talent." He spread the papers on their small kitchen table. They were promotional materials for an art exhibition, complete with sample pricing for portraits and a schedule of viewing times. "I've talked to some local arts writers," David continued, his words tumbling out rapidly. "They're interested in doing features on our young prodigy. Think about it. We could have regular shows, special events. The restaurant would just be the beginning." Oliver watched Sarah's expression carefully. She was studying the papers with interest, but he could see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her pencil a little tighter. "It sounds big," she said finally, her voice small. "It could be huge," David exclaimed. "We could make your name known throughout Manchester, maybe even beyond. Your drawings could command serious prices." As David continued outlining his plans, Oliver remembered something Sarah had told him that first day at the Golden Spoon. "I just draw what I see." The simplicity of that statement seemed at odds with David's grand schemes of art shows and newspaper features, yet he could also see the potential benefits. Sarah's talent deserved recognition, and the income from her art could secure her future. The challenge would be finding the right balance, supporting her gift without exploiting it. The art exhibition opened on a crisp autumn evening, transforming the Copper Kettle into an elegant gallery. David had outdone himself with the arrangements, replacing the usual tables with easels displaying Sarah's best works. Soft lighting highlighted each drawing, while classical music played quietly in the background. Sarah stood near her drawing table, wearing a new dress Lucy had helped her choose. She looked both proud and nervous as people gathered around her work, discussing her technique and asking about her inspiration. Oliver stayed close by, ready to step in if she became overwhelmed. "The detail in these portraits is remarkable," a local art critic commented, studying a drawing of an elderly man sharing tea with his granddaughter. "She captures not just the physical likeness, but the emotional connection between her subjects, quite extraordinary for someone so young." The evening proved a tremendous success. Several drawings sold for substantial sums, and many more portrait commissions were booked. David was ecstatic, moving through the crowd with a broad smile, already planning future events. But as the weeks passed, the pressure began to mount. David scheduled more exhibitions, arranged interviews with local papers, and constantly pushed for new drawings to meet the growing demand. Sarah's corner of the restaurant became less of a creative space and more of a production line. "Just 3 more portraits to finish today," David would say, checking his list. "The Hendersons are coming at 4, then the Wilsons at 5, and Mrs. Patterson wants her family portrait done before closing." Oliver noticed the changes in Sarah gradually. The joy she once showed in her work dimmed, replaced by a focused determination that seemed too adult for her young face. She spent less time on each drawing, rushing to meet David's schedules rather than waiting for inspiration to strike naturally. One afternoon, while helping Sarah organize her drawing supplies, Oliver found a small sketchbook hidden beneath her regular work materials. Inside were quick, loose sketches, studies of pigeons in the square, clouds shifting above the Manchester skyline, leaves dancing in the wind. These drawings had a freedom and spontaneity that her commissioned works were starting to lose. "These are beautiful," he said, showing her the sketchbook. "I haven't seen you do drawings like these lately." Sarah took the book, running her fingers over the pages. "I do them sometimes, early in the morning before anyone else is awake. They're just for me, not for selling." The wistfulness in her voice made Oliver's heart ache. That evening, he tried to discuss his concerns with David. "She's doing too much," he said, as they counted the day's earnings. "She needs time to be a child, to draw for pleasure, not just for profit." "She's doing wonderfully," David countered, gesturing to the stack of commission requests. "Look at these bookings. We're scheduled solid for the next month. The customers love her work and the money will secure her future. Isn't that what we all want?" "Of course it is, but..." "Then trust me on this, Oliver. I know what I'm doing." Sarah's gift is special, and we have a responsibility to nurture it properly. But David's idea of nurturing seemed to involve pushing Sarah harder each week. He began scheduling back-to-back portrait sessions, allowing barely any time between customers. The drawings were still beautiful, still captured something essential about their subjects, but the process had become mechanical, lacking the spontaneous magic of her earlier work. Lucy noticed the change too. Coming in for her usual afternoon tea, she found Sarah slumped over her drawing table, fast asleep with a half-finished portrait before her. "This isn't right," she told Oliver as he served her tea. "She's exhausted. David's turning her into a machine." Oliver agreed, but he felt trapped. They owed David so much. The job, the flat, the chance he'd taken on them both. How could they challenge his decisions without seeming ungrateful? The breaking point came during another busy Saturday. Sarah had been drawing since morning, with only brief breaks between portraits. As she worked on her final commission of the day, a family of 5 who had traveled from Liverpool specifically to be drawn by the Manchester Marvel, as the papers had dubbed her, her hand began to shake. "I can't," she whispered, her pencil slipping from her fingers. "I can't see them properly anymore. Everything's just lines and shadows, not people." Oliver saw tears forming in her eyes and knew he had to act. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about protecting something precious from being lost in the rush for success. The Sunday morning sun barely peeked through Manchester's cloudy sky as Oliver paced the small flat, gathering his thoughts. Below, the copper kettle sat quiet and empty, a rare moment of peace before another busy day would begin. Sarah still slept, exhausted from yesterday's events, her sketchbook lying open beside her bed. He'd spent most of the night thinking about what needed to be done. The sight of Sarah's tears, her trembling hands, and the lost look in her eyes had settled something in his heart. They couldn't continue like this. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Lucy, arriving earlier than usual, her nurse's bag slung over her shoulder. "I came to check on her," she said, stepping inside. "I couldn't stop thinking about what happened yesterday." "She's still sleeping," Oliver replied, keeping his voice low. "First proper rest she's had in weeks." Lucy nodded, setting her bag down. "I spoke with David last night after you'd taken her upstairs. He's worried about losing momentum with the business. Says people are coming from all over the north just to see her work." "Her work," Oliver repeated, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. "Not her. They come for what she can create. but nobody seems to see what it's costing her. Through the window, they watched as David arrived, unlocking the restaurant's front door. Even on Sundays, he insisted on opening early, knowing some customers would travel far for a chance to commission a portrait. "I have to talk to him," Oliver said firmly. "This has to stop." Lucy touched his arm gently. "Would you like me to come with you?" He shook his head. "No, stay with Sarah. She trusts you, and I'd feel better knowing someone's watching over her." The restaurant's kitchen was filled with the smell of fresh bread as Oliver made his way downstairs. David stood at the counter, reviewing his scheduling book, making notes beside each booking. "Ah, Oliver," he looked up with a smile. "Good timing. I've had to rearrange today's appointments after yesterday's incident. I think if we start Sarah an hour earlier, we can still fit everyone in." "No." Oliver's voice was quiet but firm. "We need to talk about Sarah." David's smile faded slightly. "If this is about yesterday, I understand she was tired. Perhaps we could arrange shorter sessions, maybe add a few more breaks between customers." "It's not just about yesterday." Oliver moved closer, picking up Sarah's latest sketchbook that lay on the counter. "Look at these drawings, David. Really look at them." He flipped through the pages, showing the progression over the past weeks. The early sketches were full of life and emotion, each line placed with care and purpose. But the recent ones, though still technically brilliant, had lost something essential: the joy, the spontaneity that made them special. "She's still producing beautiful work," David argued, though Oliver noticed a flicker of uncertainty cross his face. "She's 12 years old," Oliver countered. "She should be drawing because she wants to, not because there's a queue of customers waiting. You're turning her gift into a burden." "I'm trying to secure her future." David's voice rose slightly. "Do you know how much money these portraits bring in? She could have everything she's ever wanted, except the freedom to be herself." Oliver placed the sketchbook carefully on the counter. "When was the last time you saw her draw something just for pleasure? When was the last time she spent an afternoon watching people in the square, finding stories in their faces?" David fell silent, his hands flat on the counter. "I remember the day you offered us a place here," Oliver continued, his voice softening. "You saw something special in Sarah's talent, something worth nurturing. But this isn't nurturing, David. This is exploitation, just dressed up in nicer clothes than what she faced on the streets." The morning light streamed through the restaurant's windows, casting long shadows across the floor. From upstairs came the faint sound of voices. Lucy and Sarah, probably sharing breakfast at their small kitchen table. "She needs time," Oliver said. "Time to study, to play, to draw what moves her heart, not what fills the appointment book. If we keep pushing her like this, we'll lose not just her art, but her spirit." David ran a hand through his hair, his expression troubled. For the first time since the exhibitions began, he looked uncertain, the businessman giving way to the kind-hearted person Oliver had first met. "I got carried away, didn't I?" he said finally, closing the scheduling book. "With the success, the recognition, the possibilities. We all want what's best for her," Oliver agreed. "But we need to remember she's a child first, an artist second. The rest can wait." A quiet shuffle at the door made them both turn. Sarah stood there in her pajamas, Lucy behind her, both watching the scene unfold. The next few weeks brought significant changes to the copper kettle. David, true to his word, scaled back the portrait sessions dramatically. Instead of back-to-back appointments, Sarah now drew only when she felt inspired, with plenty of time between sittings to rest and observe. The restaurant's walls still displayed her artwork, but now they included more than just commissioned portraits. Alongside the formal drawings hung sketches of everyday life, the local baker kneading dough in his window, children playing in the autumn leaves, elderly couples sharing quiet moments on park benches. "These new pieces," a regular customer commented one morning, studying a drawing of the Manchester skyline at dawn, "they have such life in them, such joy." Sarah spent her mornings with Mrs. Blackwood, making remarkable progress in her studies. Her afternoons were divided between drawing and simply watching the world go by, filling her small sketchbooks with quick studies and observations. Oliver noticed the change in her immediately. The shadows under her eyes faded, replaced by the spark of curiosity he'd first seen in her all those months ago at the Golden Spoon. She laughed more easily, played with other children in the square, and drew with renewed enthusiasm. David, to his credit, embraced the new arrangement wholeheartedly. He even set up a small reading corner near Sarah's drawing space, filled with art books and stories that Lucy helped select. The copper kettle became known not just for its food and art, but for its warm, welcoming atmosphere. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as Sarah worked on a casual sketch of two friends sharing tea and secrets, a new customer entered the restaurant. Oliver was busy serving another table, but something about the woman caught his attention. She moved slowly, almost hesitantly, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. The woman chose a table near Sarah's corner, ordering only a cup of tea. As she waited, her gaze kept drifting to the young artist, watching her work with an intensity that made Oliver slightly nervous. "Would you like to see some of the artwork?" he asked when he brought her tea, trying to gauge her intentions. "Yes, please," she replied softly, her voice carrying a hint of a northern accent similar to Sarah's. "I've heard about the young artist here. People say she has a special way of seeing people, of capturing their hearts on paper." Oliver nodded, beginning to point out some of the drawings on the walls, but the woman seemed distracted, her attention fixed on Sarah. "How long has she been here?" she asked suddenly, her hands clasping her teacup tightly. "Several months now," Oliver answered carefully, studying the woman's face. There was something familiar about her features, something that tugged at his memory. Sarah chose that moment to look up from her drawing, her eyes meeting the woman's across the room. For a long moment they stared at each other, recognition dawning slowly on both faces. The pencil slipped from Sarah's fingers, rolling across the floor until it stopped at the woman's feet. As she bent to pick it up, her hands trembling slightly, Sarah whispered a single word that changed everything. "Mum?" The teacup clattered against its saucer as the woman stood, tears streaming down her face. Sarah remained frozen at her drawing table, her expression a mix of shock, hope, and fear. Oliver moved quickly to Sarah's side, protective instincts kicking in, but Lucy's hand on his arm stopped him. She had appeared silently beside them, watching the scene unfold with her nurse's trained eye. "Look at them, Oliver," she murmured. "Really look." He did. He saw the same curve of the nose, the same way of holding their heads slightly tilted when concentrating. But more than the physical similarities, he saw the same depth of feeling in their eyes, the same capacity for seeing beauty in the world around them. The woman took a small step forward, then another, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been searching for so long, love, so very long." Sarah stood slowly, her hand reaching for her sketchbook, the one filled with dreams and memories she'd never shared with anyone. Opening it carefully, she pulled out a worn drawing, holding it out like a bridge between them. It was a portrait of the woman, younger but unmistakable, smiling down at a small child. The edges were smudged from countless touches, but the love in the drawn mother's eyes remained clear and bright. David closed the copper kettle early that afternoon, turning the sign to closed and drawing the curtains to give the family some privacy. Lucy prepared tea for everyone, her gentle presence helping to calm the charged atmosphere. Emma Williams, Sarah's mother, sat at a corner table with her daughter, both still looking at each other as if afraid the other might vanish. The worn drawing lay between them on the table, a bridge across the years they'd lost. "I never stopped looking for you," Emma said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the drawing. "Every city, every street. I kept hoping I'd find you." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened? Why did you—" "I didn't leave you, love." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You were everything to me. But when your father fell ill, things got very hard very quickly." Oliver sat nearby, close enough to support Sarah if needed, but far enough to give them space. He watched as Emma gathered her courage to tell her story. "Your father's illness took everything we had," she began. "The treatments, the medicines. I worked 3 jobs trying to keep up with the bills, but it wasn't enough. We lost our home and I had to send you to stay with your aunt while I tried to find work in Liverpool." Sarah nodded slowly, remembering. "Aunt Margaret. She was nice." "She was," Emma agreed. "But then she had her accident and everything fell apart. I rushed back from Liverpool, but by the time I arrived, the social services had already taken you. Aunt Margaret couldn't tell them where I was because I'd been moving between temporary jobs, trying to save enough money." Emma's voice broke. Lucy quietly placed a fresh cup of tea in front of her, squeezing her shoulder gently. "I searched every children's home in Manchester," Emma continued, But you weren't in any of them. Nobody could tell me where you'd gone. I kept searching, took any job I could find that let me look for you during my free time. I ran away, Sarah admitted. From the children's home. I didn't like it there, they didn't let me draw. Emma reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. You always loved drawing. Even as a tiny thing, you were always sketching on any paper you could find, just like your father. Sarah's eyes widened. Dad drew too? He was an artist. Emma smiled through her tears. Not professionally. He worked in an office, but he filled sketchbooks with drawings of everything he saw. That's how we met, actually. He was sitting in a park, drawing the ducks on the pond, and I stopped to watch him work. Oliver noticed how Sarah sat up straighter, drinking in every detail about the father she barely remembered. He saw her free hand moving almost unconsciously, as if itching to capture this moment on paper. When I saw your drawings in the newspaper, Emma said, gesturing to the artwork on the walls, I could hardly believe it. They wrote about this remarkable young artist at the Copper Kettle, and something about the way they described your work. I knew it had to be you, the way you see people, the way you capture their feelings. That's your father's gift. David, who had been quietly arranging chairs, spoke up. She's touched many lives with that gift. Made this place something special. Emma looked around the restaurant, taking in the warm atmosphere, the drawings on the walls, the obvious care that had gone into creating this space. You found good people here, she said softly. They took care of me, Sarah replied, glancing at Oliver with a small smile. Oliver found me when I was hungry, and David gave us a home, and Lucy helps me with everything, and Mrs. Blackwood teaches me. Mrs. Blackwood? Emma's eyes lit up with recognition. Eleanor Blackwood, the teacher? Lucy nodded. You know her? She was my teacher years ago. She's the one who encouraged your father's art, Sarah. She used to let him draw during lunch breaks when the other teachers wanted him to focus only on his studies. The coincidence hung in the air like a sign, another thread connecting past to present. Sarah reached for her current sketchbook, opening it to a fresh page. Could I? She hesitated, then gathered her courage. Could I draw you? Properly this time, not from memory. Emma's smile was radiant through her tears. I'd like that very much, love. As Sarah began to draw, Oliver noticed something different about her technique. Her lines were sure and steady, but there was a new quality to them, a sense of completion, as if a missing piece had finally fallen into place. The weeks that followed brought changes to everyone at the Copper Kettle. Emma found a flat just 2 streets away, close enough for Sarah to visit every day, but maintaining the independence she had built with Oliver. She also found work at a local bookshop, her knowledge of art books making her particularly valuable to the owner. Sarah's art underwent a subtle transformation. While her portraits were still remarkably insightful, they now carried an added dimension of joy, as if her rediscovered sense of family had deepened her understanding of human connections. One morning, as Sarah worked on a commissioned portrait of a young family, Emma sat quietly nearby, sorting through old sketchbooks she had kept safe all these years. Look at this, she said softly, showing one to Oliver. This was one of your father's last drawings. The sketch showed a young Sarah asleep, her small hand clutching a pencil even in slumber. The detail was extraordinary, capturing not just her physical features, but the peaceful innocence of childhood dreams. He always said drawing was a way of holding on to moments, Emma explained, carefully turning the pages. That when you draw someone, you're not just capturing their appearance, but a piece of their soul. Oliver watched Sarah working, seeing how she paused between strokes to really look at her subjects, to understand them before putting pencil to paper. She had inherited more than just her father's talent. She had his way of seeing the world. David, true to his word, had maintained the more relaxed atmosphere in the restaurant. The portrait sessions were now limited to specific hours, giving Sarah plenty of time for her studies and free drawing. He had even set up a small gallery space in the back room where both Sarah's commissioned works and her personal sketches could be displayed. It's actually better for business this way, he admitted to Oliver one evening as they closed up. People appreciate the art more when it comes from a place of genuine inspiration. And Sarah's happier, which shows in her work. Lucy had helped Emma find a counselor who specialized in helping families reunite after long separations. The sessions were helping both mother and daughter navigate their new relationship, dealing with the complex emotions of their time apart, while building a stronger foundation for their future together. Mrs. Blackwood was overjoyed to reconnect with Emma, and their shared memories helped Sarah understand more about her father. The elderly teacher brought out old-school photographs and artwork from Emma's school days, creating a bridge between past and present. "Your father used to say that life is like a sketch," Mrs. Blackwood told Sarah during one of their lessons. "You start with rough lines and sometimes they go wrong, but you can always add new details, shade in the dark parts, highlight the bright ones, until it becomes something beautiful." The truth of those words was evident in the way their lives were reshaping themselves. Oliver noticed how the Copper Kettle had become more than just a restaurant. It was a gathering place for their unusual family, where art and food and love blended together to create something unique. Sarah still kept her special corner by the window, but now she shared it with her mother some mornings, both of them sketching the world as they saw it. Their styles were different. Emma's drawings were softer, more traditional, while Sarah's captured the hidden emotions beneath the surface, but they complemented each other perfectly. One Saturday afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the restaurant door. It was Professor Williams, the regular customer from the Golden Spoon, who had defended Sarah's art months ago. He stood amazed at the transformation of both the space and the young artist herself. "My word," he said, looking around at the displayed artwork. "How you've created something remarkable here." Sarah smiled, putting the finishing touches on her current drawing, a portrait of Oliver serving tea to Emma, while Lucy and David argued good-naturedly about the best way to arrange the new gallery space. "We all did," she replied, signing her name with a flourish. "Everyone brought something special to make it work." The professor studied the new drawing, noting how it captured not just the physical scene, but the warm bonds between the people in it. "You've found your own way of seeing," he said approvingly, "your own artistic voice." Sarah looked around at her family, the one she had lost and found again, and the one she had built along the way. "I just draw what I see," she said, echoing her words from that first day at the Golden Spoon. "And now I see so much more." 1 year had passed since that rainy Tuesday when Emma first walked into the Copper Kettle. The Manchester winter had given way to spring, and the restaurant buzzed with its usual warm activity. Sarah sat at her drawing table, which now bore a small brass plaque reading "Artist in Residence," a birthday gift from David. She was working on a special project, a series of drawings chronicling her journey from the streets to her current life. It wasn't for an exhibition or sale. This was personal, a way of understanding and accepting her own story. "Your technique has improved considerably," Mrs. Blackwood observed, looking over Sarah's shoulder at a drawing of the Golden Spoon. "Though you always had the gift of seeing beneath the surface." Sarah nodded, adding subtle shading to the figure of Oliver in the drawing, capturing the kindness in his expression that had changed her life that day. "Mum's been teaching me some of Dad's techniques. She found his old instructional notebooks." The mention of her father no longer brought sadness. Instead, Sarah felt a connection to him through art, understanding him better through the notes and sketches he'd left behind. Emma had shared stories of how he would spend hours perfecting a single line, believing that every stroke should have purpose and meaning. Oliver, meanwhile, had his own news to share. With encouragement from both Sarah and Emma, he'd finally gathered the courage to show his writings to a local publisher. His stories, inspired by their experiences but woven with imagination and hope, had caught the publisher's interest. "They want to include illustrations," he told Sarah during a quiet moment between customers. "I was hoping you might consider—" "Yes," Sarah interrupted, her eyes shining. "I'd love to draw for your stories, Oliver. When can we start?" The idea of collaborating with Oliver on a book felt right, like completing a circle that had begun with that first act of kindness outside the Golden Spoon. Lucy, who had become such an integral part of their extended family, had her own relationship news to share. She and David had begun dating, their shared care for Sarah having grown into something deeper over the months. "You know," Lucy said one evening, helping Sarah pack up her art supplies, "I used to think my role was just to help people get better physically, but being part of this, watching you heal and grow, seeing how art can mend hearts, it's taught me there are many ways to help people heal." The Copper Kettle itself had evolved. David's initial dream of an artistic hub had been realized, but in a more organic, meaningful way than he'd first imagined. The restaurant hosted monthly community art nights, where local artists, inspired by Sarah's story, volunteered to teach children from disadvantaged backgrounds. Sometimes the best plans are the ones that grow naturally, David reflected, watching a young boy learn to hold a pencil properly under Sarah's patient guidance. Like a garden that plants itself, Emma had settled well into her new life. Her work at the bookshop had expanded to include curating art books and organizing reading sessions for children. She spent her free time either with Sarah or helping Oliver research historical details for his stories. One particularly meaningful moment came when Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Mr. Thompson, her old adversary from the Golden Spoon, stepped into the copper kettle one quiet afternoon. "I've been following your progress in the papers," he said, looking around at the artwork that filled the walls. "I was wrong about you, about what you could bring to a place. I owe you an apology." Sarah's response was to reach for her sketchbook. "Would you like me to draw your portrait, Mr. Thompson? I've learned a lot since we last met." The resulting portrait captured not just Mr. Thompson's appearance, but the humility and regret in his expression, along with a hint of admiration for what Sarah had achieved. It became one of her most meaningful pieces, a reminder that people could change and grow. Professor Williams, who had become a regular patron and friend, often brought his university colleagues to see Sarah's work. "What you've created here," he told them, "goes beyond art. It's a testament to the power of seeing the best in people, of giving them space to grow into themselves." As Sarah put the finishing touches on her personal series of drawings, she felt a sense of completion. Each image told part of her story: the lonely days on the street, Oliver's kindness, David's offer of a home, Lucy's gentle support, the joy of finding her mother again, and the daily warmth of the copper kettle. The grand reopening of the copper kettle coincided with the launch of Oliver's first book. The restaurant had been closed for 2 weeks for renovations, transforming the space into something that honored both its past and its future. The walls now featured a permanent gallery of Sarah's work, including her personal series of drawings that told their shared story. The evening air was filled with the buzz of conversation and the soft notes of a local string quartet. Sarah stood beside her mother, both of them wearing new dresses for the occasion, greeting guests and sharing stories behind the artwork. "This is where it all began," Sarah explained to a group of visitors, pointing to her drawing of the Golden Spoon. "When Oliver found me outside that restaurant, I thought I was just getting a meal. Instead, I found a family. Oliver's book, a collection of short stories inspired by their experiences but woven with magical elements, sat proudly displayed on a table near Sarah's drawing corner. Her illustrations brought his words to life, capturing the wonder and hope that ran through his tales. "We make a good team," he told her, adjusting the display of books. "Your drawings say things my words can't quite reach." The celebration brought together all the people who had played a part in their journey. Mrs. Blackwood chatted with Professor Williams about art education. Lucy and David moved among the guests, their hands clasped together, sharing their vision for the restaurant's future community programs. Even some of Sarah's first subjects from the Golden Spoon days had come to celebrate. The elderly couple she had drawn that very first day brought their original portrait, now professionally framed. "We knew even then that you were special," the old gentleman said, showing how he had carefully preserved the drawing. "You saw the love we shared and put it on paper. That's a rare gift, young lady." As the evening progressed, Sarah found a quiet moment to add one final drawing to her collection. She sketched the scene before her: Oliver signing books while Emma proudly watched, Lucy leaning against David as they talked with guests, Mrs. Blackwood demonstrating drawing techniques to a group of children, and Professor Williams examining the artwork with his scholarly attention to detail. But in this drawing she included herself, not just as an observer, but as part of the family she had found and created. She drew herself standing among them, pencil in hand, surrounded by love and possibility. "That's my favorite one yet," Emma said softly, looking over her daughter's shoulder, "because it shows you as we see you, brave, talented, and loved." Sarah added the final touches to the drawing, signing her name with confidence. Above her signature, she wrote the words her father had written in one of his old sketchbooks: "Art is the way we remind ourselves that we are never truly alone." The Copper Kettle had become more than just a restaurant with an artistic flair. It was a place where creativity and kindness merged, where people found not just food for their bodies, but nourishment for their souls. Sarah's corner remained a space where anyone could ask for a portrait, but now it was also a place where young artists could learn, where stories were shared, and where hope was always in abundance. As the evening drew to a close, Oliver gathered everyone for a toast. "To the power of seeing the best in people," he said, raising his glass. "And to the artist who taught us all how to look with our hearts." Sarah looked around at her family, the one she had lost and found, and the one she had built along the way. Each face was as familiar to her as the drawings that lined the walls, each person a vital part of the portrait her life had become. She picked up her pencil one last time that evening, not to draw but to write beneath her final sketch, "Every person has a story worth telling, every heart has beauty worth seeing, and every life has the power to change other lives for the better." The copper kettle's lights glowed warmly in the Manchester evening, a beacon of art, love, and possibility. Inside, the portraits on the walls told stories of connection, of hope, and of the extraordinary things that could happen when one person chose to see the best in another.